Every retailer works on a margin: buy low, sell high, and stay profitable across thousands of products at once. That's just how a business like this survives. But every once in a while, a handful of new items show up on a shelf that genuinely make you wonder if someone in the pricing department made a mistake. Because based on what these products actually cost to manufacture and ship, there's almost no way this store is making real money selling them at $1 or $2. I went through this month's newest arrivals, specifically looking for exactly that. Products where the quality and materials clearly cost more than what you're being charged. I found 10 of them, and by the end of this list, you'll understand why more than one employee I talked to genuinely laughed when I asked whether these were priced correctly. Stick around until the end, because the last item on this list is the one that made the biggest impression on me, a product that would easily run you $15 to $20 anywhere else. Before I get into it, I want to explain my method here, because I didn't just eyeball these and guess. For each item, I looked at the core materials involved, the type of manufacturing process required, and compared it against publicly available pricing for similar raw components and finished products elsewhere. This isn't a claim about the company's actual internal profit margins, which obviously depend on bulk purchasing power and supply chain deals none of us can see from the outside. It's simply an honest look at what these specific products are built with and how that stacks up against the price tag sitting on the shelf. Number 1. Solar-powered outdoor string lights. At $1.50, this new arrival includes an actual solar panel, a rechargeable battery, and a full string of small LED bulbs, all in one compact package. Comparable solar string lights at hardware stores or garden centers typically run $12 to $18, mostly because of the solar panel and battery components, which are usually the most expensive part of any solar-powered product. I tested this by leaving it charging in direct sunlight for a full day, then letting it run that evening, and it stayed lit at a reasonable brightness for close to 6 hours before noticeably dimming, which is genuinely respectable performance for something this cheap. The light output is warmer and slightly dimmer than a premium solar light set, so it works best for ambiance and light pathway marking rather than serious functional outdoor lighting, but for a patio, a fence line, or wrapped around a porch railing, it performs well above what the price suggests. Given that the solar panel and rechargeable battery alone typically cost more to manufacture than what you're paying for the entire finished product, it's hard to imagine this item carries any real profit margin at all. I actually opened up a second unit specifically to look at the internal wiring and battery compartment, and the components inside looked genuinely comparable in size and build to what I've seen in pricier solar lights, not the stripped-down corner-cut version I half expected to find. Up next is an item that solves a genuinely practical daily problem for a fraction of what you'd expect to pay. Number 2. An insulated lunch bag with a full zipper closure. At $1.50, this new arrival includes real thermal insulation lining, not just a slightly thicker fabric pretending to keep food cool. Comparable insulated lunch bags at office supply or specialty lunch gear retailers typically run $8 to $14. I packed this with a cold drink and a sandwich, left it in a warm car for about an hour specifically to stress test it, and both were still noticeably cool when I checked, which genuinely surprised me given the price point. The zipper glides smoothly without catching, and the seams held together firmly under a full lunch load without any stitching pulling loose. The exterior fabric is a bit thinner than a premium insulated bag, so it's not something I'd expect to survive years of daily heavy use without eventually showing wear. But for a semester of school lunches or a few months of daily work commutes, it performs remarkably well. Considering the insulation lining alone typically accounts for a meaningful chunk of manufacturing cost on a bag like this, the margin on this specific item has to be razor thin at best. I've now used this same bag daily for almost 2 weeks straight, tossing it in and out of a backpack, and the zipper pull hasn't loosened, and the insulation still feels just as thick as it did on day one, which is honestly more durability than I expected from something at this price point. Moving on to a kitchen item that genuinely surprised me with its build quality. Number 3. An enamel-coated mini cast-iron style skillet. At $1.50, this new arrival mimics the look and basic function of a real enameled cast-iron skillet, a category of cookware that normally starts around $25, even at the lower end. This version isn't genuine cast iron, it's a lighter weight metal with an enamel coating, but the coating itself is smooth and even, without visible bubbling or thin spots that would suggest a rushed manufacturing process. I used it to fry a single egg and a few strips of bacon, and the enamel coating held up fine under direct heat, with food releasing cleanly without excessive sticking. It's noticeably lighter in hand than genuine cast iron, which actually makes it easier to maneuver for quick single-serving cooking, though it won't retain heat as long or as evenly as the real thing for slow, even cooking. For single servings, small households, or as a genuinely charming way to serve a baked dip or cornbread straight from the pan, this performs far better than a $1.50 price tag has any right to suggest. I've now used mine for a small weekend breakfast almost every week since buying it, and the enamel coating still looks essentially like new, no chipping around the rim, no discoloration from repeated heat cycles, which is exactly the kind of longevity you'd hope for from cookware costing significantly more. The next item is one that home cooks specifically get excited about finding here. Number 4. A large stainless steel mixing bowl. At $1.50, this new arrival is a genuinely generous size, large enough for a full batch of cookie dough or a substantial salad for a family gathering. Comparable large stainless steel mixing bowls at kitchen specialty stores run $7 to $12, depending on size and gauge of steel. The metal feels solid in hand, not thin or prone to denting the way some ultra-cheap stainless steel products can be, and it sat stable on my counter without wobbling or tipping, even while I was vigorously whisking ingredients inside it. The rim is smooth without any sharp edges or rough seams, which matters more than people think when you're using a bowl regularly for food prep. Raw stainless steel at the gauge and size used here typically costs more per unit than what this bowl is being sold for once you account for the manufacturing and shipping involved, which is exactly the kind of math that makes an item like this genuinely puzzling from a profit standpoint. I actually weighed mine on a kitchen scale out of curiosity, and it came in noticeably heavier than I expected for something this cheap, which usually correlates directly with how much actual steel went into making it, rather than a thin, lightweight stamping that just looks the part in photos. Up next is a seasonal item that gardeners have been specifically asking about. Number 5. A 3-piece garden tool set that includes a trowel, a cultivator, and a pair of gardening gloves. At $1.50 for the complete set, this covers the basic tools most home gardeners actually reach for regularly. Comparable garden tool sets at hardware or garden centers typically run $10 to $15 for a similar 3-piece combination. The metal tool heads are riveted securely to the handles rather than simply glued, which held up fine through an afternoon of actual garden bed prep work, turning soil and clearing small weeds without the head loosening or wobbling. The gloves included are a basic cotton and rubber grip combination, not heavy-duty enough for thorny bushes or serious yard work, but perfectly adequate for general planting and light garden maintenance. Given that metal tool heads, wooden or plastic handles, and a pair of gloves all bundled together typically cost more to source individually than what this entire set sells for, it's genuinely hard to see where any profit margin is hiding in this particular product. I compared the trowel specifically against a similar single tool sold separately at a hardware store, and the blade thickness and handle construction felt essentially identical, which made the fact that this version comes as part of a 3-piece bundle at this price feel even harder to make sense of. The next item is one that surprised me with how sturdy it actually felt once I had it fully assembled. Number 6. A storage ottoman with a hinged lid. At $1.50, this is one of the more ambitious new arrivals on this list. A small footstool-sized ottoman that opens up to reveal genuine storage space inside while still being sturdy enough to sit on. Comparable storage ottomans at home goods retailers typically run $15 to $25. The frame held my full weight without buckling or feeling unstable when I sat down to test it, and the hinge mechanism on the lid opened and closed smoothly without catching or requiring excessive force. The fabric covering is a simple canvas-style material rather than a plush upholstered finish, so it won't necessarily match a more polished living room aesthetic, but for a kid's room, a dorm, or extra hidden storage tucked in a closet or entryway, it performs a genuinely useful dual function. Between the internal frame structure, the hinge hardware, and the fabric covering, the component costs alone on an item like this typically add up to more than the entire retail price being charged here. My nephew has been using his as extra seating in his dorm room for a full semester now, sat on daily, opened and closed constantly for extra storage, and it's shown no signs of the frame loosening or the fabric tearing at the seams, which is genuinely impressive durability for a piece of furniture at this price. Moving on to an item that's become surprisingly popular for anyone active outdoors during warmer months. Number 7. A microfiber cooling towel. At $1.25, this new arrival uses a moisture-activated cooling technology, the kind of towel that feels noticeably cool to the touch once wet and wrung out. A category of product that typically runs $8 to $15 at sporting goods stores. I tested this during an actual outdoor workout, wetting it under a tap, wringing it out, and draping it around my neck, and the cooling effect was genuinely noticeable and lasted for a solid 20 minutes or so before needing to be re-wet. The fabric is thinner than a premium athletic cooling towel, so the cooling sensation doesn't last quite as long between re-wetting, but the core function works exactly as intended. For anyone doing yard work, outdoor exercise, or just trying to stay comfortable during a hot summer day, this is a genuinely functional product at a price that barely covers the cost of the specialized fabric alone. I've since kept one in my gym bag permanently and another in the car for whenever I'm doing anything outside in direct sun, and both have held up through repeated wetting and drying cycles without the fabric breaking down or losing its cooling effectiveness over time. The next item is a kitchen staple that got a quiet upgrade this month. Number 8. A non-stick baking sheet pan. At $1.50, this new arrival includes a genuine non-stick coating rather than just a bare metal sheet that requires constant greasing. Comparable non-stick baking sheets at kitchen retailers typically run $6 to $10. I baked a full tray of cookies directly on it, with no parchment paper or additional grease, specifically to test the coating, and every single cookie released cleanly without sticking or tearing. The pan itself has a slight flex to it when empty, more than a heavier gauge premium sheet pan would have, but once loaded with dough and placed in the oven, it sat flat and baked evenly without warping under heat. Non-stick coating technology alone typically represents a meaningful portion of the manufacturing cost on a baking sheet like this, which makes the already low price point even harder to explain from a straightforward profit perspective. I've since run it through a dozen more baking sessions, everything from roasted vegetables to a full sheet of biscuits, and the coating hasn't started flaking or losing its non-stick performance the way some cheap coated pans do after just a handful of uses. Up next is an item that surprised me with just how heavy-duty it actually felt. Number 9. A heavy-duty canvas drop cloth. At $1.50, this new arrival is a genuinely thick, tightly woven canvas material, not the thin, almost see-through fabric some ultra-cheap drop cloths use. Comparable canvas drop cloths at hardware stores typically run $7 to $12 depending on size. I used this during a small painting project, and it successfully caught drips and splatters without any paint soaking through to the floor underneath, which is really the entire function a drop cloth needs to perform. The seams along the edges are reinforced rather than simply cut and left raw, which helps prevent fraying with repeated folding and reuse over multiple projects. For anyone doing occasional home painting projects, furniture refinishing, or general mess protection during craft projects, this performs identically to a pricier version for a fraction of the cost. I've now reused the same cloth across 3 separate small projects, shaking it out and folding it back up each time, and the seams show no signs of fraying or coming loose, despite all that repeated handling, which speaks well to the actual weave quality holding this thing together. And finally, the item that made the biggest impression on me out of everything on this entire list. Number 10. A small pet bed with raised bolster sides. At $1.50, this new arrival is sized for a small dog or cat, with a soft cushioned base and raised bolster edges that many pets specifically prefer for a sense of security while sleeping. Comparable small pet beds at pet specialty stores typically run $15 to $25. The cushioning held its shape well after a full week of regular use with a friend's cat, not flattening out or losing loft the way some ultra-cheap pet beds do within just a few days. The fabric cover is removable and machine washable, an important detail for pet owners dealing with shedding or occasional accidents, and it held up fine through 2 separate wash cycles without the seams coming apart or the fabric pilling excessively. Given the amount of stuffing material, structural bolster support, and washable fabric covering involved in a product like this, the actual component costs alone typically exceed what's being charged for the entire finished bed. which is exactly why this specific item stuck with me the most while putting this list together. Watching that same cat immediately curl up in the bolster corner the very first time I set it down, and continue choosing it over every other spot in the house since, was honestly a better real-world review than anything I could have written myself about the quality of the cushioning and the shape of the raised edges. So that's the full list, 10 brand new arrivals that genuinely don't seem to add up from a straightforward manufacturing cost perspective. None of this means the store is secretly losing money across its entire business. Obviously, a company operating thousands of locations understands its own margins far better than any of us watching from the outside, likely making up for thinner margins on items like these through massive purchasing volume, efficient supply chains, and stronger margins on other products throughout the store. But from a pure materials and component standpoint, these 10 specific items genuinely look like they're priced closer to cost than profit, which is about as good as it gets for anyone shopping on a budget. Personally, the mixing bowl and the storage ottoman are the two I'd grab first if you're only making one trip, since both had the most obvious gap between what they're built with and what they're actually charging. Everything else on this list is worth adding to your cart the next time you're already in the store, since these are exactly the kind of new arrivals that tend to get quietly discontinued or repriced once someone higher up notices the math doesn't quite work out. If you've been holding off on a specific household item because the pricier version felt like more than you wanted to spend, this month's new arrivals are worth checking before that price gap closes. I want to add one honest caveat before wrapping up, because I think it matters for how you interpret a list like this one. New arrivals like these often represent limited introductory batches. Sometimes a supplier offers a short-term deal, or the company is testing demand for a new product category before committing to a long-term price point. That means items like these don't always stick around at this exact price forever, and it's not unusual to see a slight price adjustment on a product like this a few months down the line once the initial batch sells through. That's not a criticism of the store, it's simply how retail pricing on new product categories tends to work in general, testing the waters before locking in a permanent price point based on how customers actually respond. If any of these 10 specifically caught your attention, my honest advice is to grab them sooner rather than later, treating this list less like a permanent guarantee and more like a genuine snapshot of unusually good value that happens to exist on shelves right now, this month, before anything potentially changes. Value like this, where the materials and construction clearly cost more than the price tag suggests, doesn't show up often, and when it does, it's rarely a coincidence worth ignoring.